Welcome to the Joyfully Homeschooling Podcast
with our mom,
Misty Bailey. Tips and encouragement
for
real-life homeschooling
is headed your way.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to a bonus episode of the Joyfully Homeschooling Podcast. I am Misty Bailey, blogger at Joy in the Journey and podcaster here at Joyfully Homeschooling. The reason that I am throwing in an extra episode this week instead of the normal Friday episode is because today is Apraxia Awareness Day, and I am so excited to share with you what you need to know about homeschooling with apraxia and to help bring awareness to this speech and language disorder. If you follow me on social media, which I am on social media at Facebook and Instagram as Joy in the Journey. If you follow me there, you will have seen a few times this month that I have been sharing different memes and information about apraxia. And the reason behind this is because my youngest child, Daniel, my only boy, he has apraxia. So that is the reason I'm wanting to talk with you all about apraxia and share a little bit of our story. So, from a young age, I knew my son struggled with his speech. I began trying to obtain speech therapy for him when he was the age of 2. However, each time I tried, a door was shut. Our insurance would not cover speech until he was school age. He wasn't behind enough to obtain services from Head Start or REACH programs. And in Ohio, where we live, the public school system does not have to offer speech services to a child who is not enrolled in their school. So even if he would qualify for an IEP, which he has, they did not have to offer him services unless I enrolled him in school. This was even if he was not school age, which of course he wasn't. So we worked with him at home. I purchased apps, watched videos, and did all I could to help him. When he was 4, our insurance changed and he was able to start speech therapy. The therapist was new and she seemed to think he was fine. She graduated us out of speech after 6 months, and at this time he was still 70% unintelligible to most people. When he was at church, his sisters would have to translate for him to get his needs met. And keep in mind that we've been at our church since he was born, so these people knew him, but they were still unable to understand him. My mom was unable to understand him the majority of the time. However, the speech therapist graduated us from speech because she said he was where he needed to be. She just told us we needed to remind him to slow down. Other than that, he was fine. However, I knew something else was going on. So I reached out to an old friend who I knew was a speech pathologist. She evaluated him and we arranged private speech therapy in our home. However, even with a discount, she was giving us a cash discount, the cost was a huge hit to our budget. But we knew he needed it. And at this point, I had in my head diagnosed him with auditory processing disorder. Daniel had a lot of issues with his ears when he was younger, which is what some people thought was the reason behind his speech delay. And I personally felt he had auditory processing disorder, but you cannot be evaluated for auditory processing disorder until you're 6, and at this time he was 4. She suspected the same, but also mentioned to me a few times that his symptoms really mirrored apraxia. She would maybe like to further evaluate him for it, but I told her no, because the only child I knew with apraxia at that time was almost nonverbal. So I really thought she was wrong. You know, I'm the mom. I know what I'm doing, right? And dismissed her concerns or her request to do a full apraxia evaluation. So long story short, he was in private speech therapy for a while. And then whenever he was 6, we had him tested for auditory processing disorder. Not when he was 6, when he was 5. We had him tested for auditory processing disorder. And the office suggested that we have him evaluated for ADHD and dyslexia because he passed that test with flying colors. So we began that process, which I shared our ADHD story on my blog, and I'll leave that link in the comments. And where we live in a very, very rural area in Ohio, and we don't have a lot of options near us. At that time, there was only one place outside of schools where he could have obtained speech therapy. And in order to have his auditory processing test done, we waited 6 months for that. And then it took another 6 months to get in for his ADHD and dyslexia screening. Actually, it was 9 months for his dyslexia screening. So once he finally got in to this dyslexia screening, which was at a reading therapy center, was at a reading and literacy center that was also, the person who evaluated him was also a licensed speech pathologist. The results came back that he did, in fact, have apraxia. Now, she didn't ask me if she could screen him for that. She just did, and he was diagnosed. At this point, he was 6. So we had been in speech therapy trying to fight for a reason behind his issues for 4 years at this point, and he was finally diagnosed with apraxia. Because of his diagnosis, we now have speech services covered in our home twice a week, out of the home once a week, and we've also started occupational therapy. For us, apraxia is so much more than just a speech disorder. The more and more research I've done on apraxia, I can see where it affects his fine motor skills, his concentration, his ability to make eye contact, and so much more. Now, his struggles are compounded by his ADHD and possible dyslexia. We retest for that in a year. We'll retest for that when he's 7. But the more I learn about apraxia, the more I have seen how difficult life can be for my boy who struggles to find his voice. And that's why I want to share with you all some about apraxia. And maybe your child has apraxia and you're just wanting to learn more, learn some tips about homeschooling with it. I'm going to get into that later. Or maybe you're just listening to this and you know somebody with apraxia and you want to learn more. Or maybe you're listening to this and because you followed our story, you want to learn more about apraxia. I think awareness for any special need is so important because we are going to come in contact with people who have this throughout the course of our lives. So, what is apraxia? Childhood apraxia of speech is also known as CAS. It is a motor speech disorder that typically becomes apparent as a young child is learning how to talk. Children with apraxia tend to have great difficulty planning and producing the specific series of movements of the tongue, lips, jaw, and palate that are necessary for intelligible speech. Apraxia of speech can be known as many names, including verbal apraxia, developmental apraxia of speech, or verbal dyspraxia, or motor dyspraxia, which is what Daniel was diagnosed with. No matter which name it is called, the root word is praxis, meaning planned movement. To some degree or another, a child with a diagnosis of apraxia of speech has difficulty programming and planning speech movements. Apraxia of speech is a specific speech disorder. It is not a speech delay. It is so much more than just a speech delay. The challenge and difficulty that children with apraxia have in creating speech can seem very perplexing to parents, especially when they observe the skill of learning to speak developing seemingly without effort in other children. That was me. My other 2 children, my oldest was in speech therapy for a little while when she was younger, but it was nothing at all like Daniel's. And as a parent, whenever you have seen your other children speak correctly or learn easily, and then you have a child who comes along and who struggles, it is heartbreaking. It is absolutely heartbreaking, and many, many parents struggle with that. So what are the symptoms of apraxia? The symptoms of apraxia are not always the same. Again, we have a child in our community, and I went to high school with his mom, and her son and Daniel played soccer together, and they played soccer together for 2 seasons before Daniel was diagnosed with apraxia, and he has apraxia. But for him, his symptoms were completely different than Daniel's. He was almost nonverbal. And he struggles still with his speech. He struggles having a voice, but he has really, really come a long way. But his symptoms were nothing at all like Daniel. So if you would have put those 2 boys together, you would have never realized that they both had the same diagnosis. So keep in mind, as I'm reading these symptoms, that not every child is going to have all of these symptoms. Some children may have all, some children may have one, some children may have something completely different because apraxia presents itself in so many forms. So some of the symptoms: they do not coo or babble as an infant. Their first words are late, or they may be missing sounds. They have problems combining sounds, or may show long pauses between sounds. They may have problems eating. They may make inconsistent sound errors that are not the result of immaturity. They may have difficulty saying longer words or phrases. They appear to have more difficulty when they're anxious. They're hard to understand, especially for an unfamiliar listener. They have other expressive language problems, like word order confusions, word recall. They have difficulties with fine motor movement or coordination. Children with apraxia may have problems learning to read, spell, and write. They may have problems judging distances, knowing where they are in relation to other people or objects. They may have sensory issues, over or undersensitive to touch, temperature, noise, smell, taste, pain, light. This is where I had thought Daniel maybe had an auditory processing issue, because he was very, very sensitive to sound, very, very sensitive to sound. And he's also very sensitive to touch. Some people maybe would have thought he had sensory processing disorder, but this all goes back to apraxia for him. Concentration-wise, they may have problems daydreaming or concentrating for long periods of time. Their thought processes may be slower. They may not have good eye movement, or they may not be able to make eye contact. They may be easily stressed or frustrated with new routines. They have difficulty telling left and right apart or sense of direction. Again, they have problems with eye contact, literal thinking. They may repeat themselves. They may be completely distracted by background noise, which this is, again, where we had thought he may have an auditory issue. Fine motor skills, gross motor skills, balance, coordination. Apraxia presents itself in so many ways. And so really, there can be a number of issues that apraxia may mirror, but it is normally also combined with those speech and language disorders, or speech and language differences or difficulties. So how can you be diagnosed with apraxia or find a speech-language pathologist? If you suspect your child may have apraxia, it is important to have them evaluated by a speech-language pathologist. My son, at the point of his diagnosis, had been evaluated by 3 different SLPs. I didn't mention one, but in the middle of after we got our home therapist and we were paying private, it was a big hit to our pocket. So we went about 45 minutes away from us to another hospital to have him evaluated there. And that speech language pathologist evaluated him, but Daniel's personalities and hers did not mesh at all. She never mentioned apraxia. He only went there one time, but their personalities just did not mesh. So he had been evaluated by 3 different SLPs before being diagnosed. One didn't recognize the symptoms at all, but one did. However, I dismissed her concerns. The one who did recognize his symptoms was experienced with apraxia. She was also the same speech therapist as the little boy that we knew who had apraxia. But his symptoms were still very different from what she was experienced with. This is why it is so important to choose an SLP who is very experienced with apraxia and other speech problems. Please, if you have a child like my Daniel, do not allow them to dismiss you. Hold on to your gut. Keep pushing for help for your child, because not everybody is experienced with apraxia. They're just not. So please, even if you have to go out of town or away, find somebody who's experienced with apraxia if you want to have your child diagnosed. During the evaluation, your SLP will assess the child's oral, motor abilities, melody of speech, and speech sound development. They may also assess the child's receptive and expressive language skills and literacy skills to see there are additional problems. Daniel has really struggled with reading because of his apraxia, because his mouth is literally unable to form some sounds that are required for phonics instruction. So it has really affected more than just his speech. We've had to focus mainly on the whole word approach, because he's doing a lot better now. But for a long time, he was unable to sound things out phonetically because he just could not make those sounds. So what do you do after your child's diagnosed? Once your child has been diagnosed, you may go through a period of disbelief. This was me. You may struggle and wonder if your child will ever read or speak correctly. You may ask if your child will ever make friends or be understood enough to have his needs met. And I'm sorry, I'm teared up here because seeing your child struggle like that, it is so hard. There's been many, many times that Daniel will just go up to kids because he loves kids, he loves friends, and he'll go up to him and he'll try to talk to him. And they'll just say, I can't understand you, and walk away. Or they'll make comments to him about him talking like a baby. And you may wonder if they're ever going to find friends, and you may really have that doubt in the back of your head. It's hard. It is a hard thing to experience as a parent. I went through all of those scenarios through the years. And guess what? He has done fine. I truly believe that God has put people in his life to help him. The little boy I mentioned before who had apraxia, his dad was Daniel's soccer coach for 4 seasons. Where we live, we do 2 seasons of soccer a year. And his first season of soccer, his coach could not understand him. And there was this little boy who was constantly picking on him every time the coach's back was turned. And Daniel would try to tell the coach because the little boy would push him and punch him. And he couldn't understand him. His needs were not being met. And then the next season, he had Coach Todd. And he had him each season after that until we were diagnosed. And Daniel and Todd's son really, really bonded because they could understand each other. And I truly believe God put that family in our lives. And that will happen. You'll see that through the years. And just be strong. Have faith. And he's had some really great friends through the years who have taken the time to get to understand him. So he has done fine. Apraxia does not rule our lives. It is just one part of our children's story. It is not the whole story. Our children are beautiful. They are wonderfully made. They have so many other strengths that are so much more than just an apraxia diagnosis. If you feel overwhelmed by your child's struggles, I recommend making a list of those strengths. Put it on your wall. Remind yourself of those strengths. When your child feels overwhelmed and discouraged, remind him of all the things he is good at. Let him know he is more than just a child with a speech disorder. He is loved by you, by God, and he has so much to offer the world. You also want to look into as much speech therapy as your insurance covers or you can afford. A quality speech therapist will mean the world to you and your child. Consider occupational therapy as well if your child has issues with fine motor skills. Ours has helped my son work on things like cutting, writing, and even tying his shoes. As a mom of a special needs child, we can only do so much for our kids, and outside help can be a huge blessing. I noticed, and I didn't realize this until we started with occupational therapy, but I had pushed so much for him to learn academically, and not outside of his comfort zone, but he struggled with so much that I disregarded or didn't notice the struggles he was also having with cutting or writing. And I just didn't push those because I knew he was struggling with so many other things. And bringing in that occupational therapist has been a huge blessing because she takes those fine motor struggles and works with him on those. I'm able to homeschool him and work with him on that, and his speech therapist is able to work with him on his language. And we truly have a team who is there to help him. And if you have a child with apraxia, you're going to want that team. In some states, your child may qualify for assistance from the state, the school district, or another organization. I live in Ohio, and here we have, now that he's school age, we are able to utilize the John Peterson Scholarship to help pay for our in-home therapy. So we were able to keep our in-home therapist, and the state actually pays her now that he's school age because we've opted out of the public school system. Now, this does require an IEP from our school district, but it has been well worth the effort. So find what, if any, resources your state has to offer. I know some states, if your child has special needs or a certain diagnosis, they may be able to even get Medicaid, even if you are out of income or over income. Because they have special needs, you may be able to receive that. In Ohio, there's also something called BCMH, which is Borough for Center for Medical Handicaps or something like that. I'm not entirely sure of the name. But there may be resources in your state that allow you to have extra assistance over what your insurance may cover. So you may be asking yourself now, can you homeschool a child with apraxia? And let me tell you that homeschooling a child with special needs is something I would have never thought I could do, but I am doing it, and you can too. If I'm honest, my son's needs had me overwhelmed at the beginning of the school year, and I have seriously, really, truly questioned my ability to homeschool him through the years and wondered if he would be better off in the public school system. Then we got his diagnosis. I broke down in the office, and I asked that reading therapist, speech therapist, if I was doing the right thing. And she looked at me straight in the eye, and she said to me, he is in the best place possible for him. And you know what? He is. If he was in public school, he would get speech therapy 2 to 3 times a week for 20 minutes at a time. I know this because the child I mentioned before is in the same school district that my son would be in, and I know what he gets. One of those would be in a group setting. At home, he gets 3 sessions a week for an average of 30 to 45 minutes at a time, and this is all one-on-one. Because he is home, I see what his therapists are doing with him. I continue working with him outside of therapy. I know what I'm doing and am able to meet his needs because I have seen it modeled by his therapist. He also has more confidence and a stronger voice because he is homeschooled. His needs are always met. He doesn't have to worry about whether or not someone else can understand him. His struggles are met with love. They are met with one-on-one intervention. And I have seen homeschooling with apraxia work, and I believe in it. I want to share with you some quotes from other mamas who have been where you are and where I am. They shared with me about what they have learned of homeschooling with apraxia. I may not have a certificate in teaching and may not know or how to be silly like your aunties or how to be grammatically correct, but I will learn and relearn if it means I am up all night. Because I am your mom, and I know when you are too tired to learn or when you have ants in your pants and cannot focus. I know who you are and am able to help you because you are a part of me. This is from Mama T, and she's speaking to her child. Angie shares, I homeschool my grandson, who is 13 now. It has been the best thing for us. The one-on-one time has shown me just how smart he really is. He loves computers and researches anything that catches his eye. He has taught me so much. Don't worry about your child being isolated or having no friends. There are many people homeschooling. Reach out to people in your area. We live in North Carolina, and homeschooling with apraxia has been a very easy process. Laurel shares, homeschooling is the best thing I've ever done for my son with apraxia. My friend Laura Multiera, and I never know if I say her name right, but she has many blog posts on apraxia, and she's really been an encouragement to me. I'm going to link to those in the show notes. She shares, homeschooling with apraxia allows for more time for the harder tasks, more silliness to break up the speech practice, more awareness of the struggles unique to your child, and more chances to help them overcome through their unique strengths. It was hard days, like anything else, worth doing. But the rewards are so indescribable and awesome that there is no way you'd never regret all that you pour into the journey. So, mamas, if you're listening to this and wondering if you can homeschool with apraxia, let me tell you, of course you can. If you have questions, I'm going to leave a bunch of resources in the show notes. Also, leave a comment here or on social media. Check out my homeschool consultation services if you're homeschooling a child with apraxia or other special needs. I'd love to encourage you when it comes to homeschooling with apraxia. And let me tell you that while this journey has been so hard, it has been so worth it. I am so glad I did not throw in the towel whenever I was ready to, because believe me, I was ready to, because I have seen him come so far over the past 6 months. He could tie his shoes, he can snap his pants, he can read, which is something he really wanted to do, and he finally has a voice. He's intelligible now, I would say 70% of the time, which is huge for him. And it has been worth every struggle we've had. So you can homeschool with apraxia. You can homeschool a child with special needs. You can do this, and do not give up. Reach out, find support. There are 2 Facebook groups on apraxia. I'm going to link to those in the show notes as well. And those women have been wonderful sources of encouragement to me as we've been through the diagnosis and this process. And there are people out there who can help you and who will support you and who will encourage you. So don't give up. So that is it for this episode of the Joyfully Homeschooling Podcast. Again, it is Apraxia Awareness Day. So if you enjoyed this podcast, please head over to my Facebook page, join the journey, and find some of the graphics that I've shared and share those graphics or share this podcast and just let's bring awareness to the speech and language disorder. I was not an Apraxia mom until my diagnosis, and I don't know that I would have shared the awareness if I didn't know somebody who had been touched by it. So you now know somebody who has been touched by it, and I would love, love, love if you would help spread the awareness for Apraxia and help more people know about it and more people understand. If not for your child, then for mine, if your child doesn't have Apraxia. So that is it for this episode. I hope it encouraged you. I hope you've learned more about Apraxia. And I hope that you can head out and have a more joyful homeschool. Thanks for hanging out with me today, guys. Bye.